G'day everyone, my name's Zach and welcome back to Printed. In the grim darkness of the far, far future, there is only one thing, and that is war. There are plenty of chapters of Space Marines, but when you're in a bit of a tough pickle, the only one you want to see on your doorstep is the Salamanders. These bad boys are the only quote-unquote good Space Marines that you can expect to see. Everyone else, if you're a human and you're not an Astartes or a Primarch, they don't give a shit about you. If you're in a bit of a tough spot, these are the guys that you wanted to see. And inspired by that, I decided to kitbash one this week. So we're going to jump straight into that and see how I did it. For the base of this kit, we're going to be using the Terminators that came in the Leviathan set. Specifically, I have an ultimate starter set that my amazing partner bought me for Christmas.
You're welcome!
So we're going to be using that for our kit. To begin with, I just started cutting all the sprue, tabs and everything off. I wanted to get enough pieces out of the box so that I could kind of see where we had to tackle everything. I went ahead and 3D printed all of these Salamander bits that I got from this store on My Mini Factory. I'm not particularly sure where I actually found them, but as soon as I saw them, I was like, I need to do something with these. And they come out really nicely. So I started by just chopping out this little sprue thing in his head, which was an absolute nightmare. I don't think there's any easy way of doing this, so I kind of just shoved the pliers in enough to make some space for this head, and from the looks of it, it was a pretty good fit. Next up, I just went around the model and made sure to take off any sprue tabs or mold lines on it. And now we got to assemble it. I'm just using some plastic glue here. You could use super glue, but I like plastic glue just for the fact that it actually welds all of the plastic together. So I decided to just chuck his head together because this is more or less everything that we're going to be needing for the conversion. Now, since these bits are printed in resin, you do want to use super glue. If you use plastic glue, it will not work on anything resin, as it's not actually a polystyrene plastic, and it will not melt. So make sure you use super glue for this part. As you can see, the head fit in absolutely wonderfully. Now it was time to move on to the arms. As you can see, I just had to snip these two tabs off here, and for some reason the arms weren't actually completely flat. So I ended up taking a bit of sanding paper and just making those nice and smooth. This also helps roughen up the surface so that when we come back with our 3D printed bits, there's a much better adhesion between the two parts. I did also quickly scrape the arms so that we could have a nice tight bond, and once we got some super glue on there, just held it in for a few seconds. Now I found that doing it this way actually gives me a much stronger bond and helps the super glue cure quicker for some reason. Now once his arms were on, I just grabbed some super glue and then we jumped on with the shoulder pads. This is probably one of the most straightforward conversions that you can do because these kits are more or less semi-modular, I'll say, and you can kind of cut bits and pieces off very easily and not have to worry too much about sanding and filing. And now, once I've got all the bits on, you can see he is looking flash. Now I did actually want to give him a nice cinematic base and lift him up a bit, so I just scored the base and the rock that he was going to be standing on, and just chucked a bunch of super glue on there. I'm just using El Cheapo super glue that I found at the thrift store. I think it was roughly about $2.50 for 8 or 9 bottles of it, so absolute bargain. And again, just scuffing up everything. I was going to scuff up his feet, but I decided not to. I figured that with the amount of bits that I'm going to glue in, he'll sort of just stay there on his own. Now I did have a bit of trouble here, as you can see, but after that, he looked pretty good. I wasn't a huge fan of his foot floating, so I ended up coming back with a bunch of super glue and just some little rocks that I had found and just glued it under his foot. Gives him a much more solid stance and makes him look a bit more imposing. Now, when it comes to painting, I'm going to start this off with the airbrush. I actually recorded this video yesterday and I needed to get it done, but you can repeat all of these processes with rattle cans and with paintbrushes. Now, I did unfortunately drop this model and snapped some pieces off. Let me know if you can see where I fixed it, because I'd be very surprised if you can. And that is one of the downsides of working with resin, is it is very brittle. So when it came to undercoating, I just started with a surface primer. I use this one from SMS because it's pretty thin and I only need to add a little bit of lacquer thinner to it. Next up, just grabbing some titanium white from Liquitex, I went over and did a very heavy Zenithal, but making sure to keep all the shadows nice and deep. Now, I didn't actually have any Citadel paints that matched the green for the Salamanders, so I ended up grabbing some green skin flesh for this. Basically, since this paint is fully opaque, I wanted to make sure that we went over with a very light and nice coat. We wanted to keep all the information that we had from the Zenithal. Next up, I'm just going to bolster the highlights and the shadows by using some other inks. I've got this nice bright green ink and like a sort of deepish blue from Liquitex. Now, with both of those, I just more or less highlighted the upper areas. So as you can see, I'm highlighting things like his knee pad, and just on his knee here, going really thin, making sure that it doesn't blow out everywhere. If you do go ham with this, you can come back with the green skin flesh and just clean everything up. To bolster the shadows, I just used that nice aqua blue, and then I also decided to use it on the rock as well. Try and get a little bit of depth and just experiment a little. Next up with some Retributor armor, I went over all the gold parts and just gently picked them out. Now for a shoulder pad, I didn't want to paint both of them black, so I just grabbed some Mephiston red, and instead of just using it over everything, I made sure to only use it on the upper parts. If we want to come back later, we can shade this, but I decided not to for the sake of it not really being a massive part of the model. Now, to block in all of the black parts, I just grabbed some Black Legion, and we're going to go over a few important pieces. Mostly his shoulder pad just here, and being very careful of all the gold elements that we just painted. If you want it to be a little bit easier, I'd recommend probably just doing the black first and then doing the gold later. I didn't really think ahead and just painted the gold beforehand. Now you also want to go ahead and pick out all of his vents and his little softer bits in his armor. And then I wasn't super happy with the depth of the armor, so I ended up just doing a pin wash through all of the recesses and give him a little bit of depth. Now I wanted to make sure the gold was nice, so I grabbed some Reichland Flesh Shade and just quickly shaded over everything. Now, metallics are super easy. Just grab some lead belcher, heavily brushed it over everything. I wasn't going to worry too much about shading all of this, since it's not a massive portion of the model. Now it's time to pick out all the flames on the model. This is a super simple thing, and basically all you need to do is grab a yellow paint, a red paint, and an orange paint. Now starting with a yellow base coat, put it over everything. This is going to be our deepest part of the flame. Next up, come in with your orange, and you want to highlight roughly about 50% of the top of the flame. Now finally, I just come in and roughly on maybe the last 20% of the flame, I'll just put a nice little thin highlight, because we want to try and keep some of those brighter colors in the recess to really give it that hot look. Now you can go a step further with this and add a bit of black or gray to the top so that it simulates smoke, but I can't say I'm a massive fan of this, so I tend to just leave it out and just keep it a nice bright fiery color. Now using some Steel Legion Drab, I'm just going to go over and pick all the bone colors out. Now instead of base coating this, similarly to the red that we did on the shoulder pad, I just went ahead and picked out all the highlights. Now with some pale sand, I mixed it in and slowly built up those highlights over a few layers, gradually adding a little bit more pale sand as we went up. Now with the rock, I ended up just experimenting around. I grabbed some German Legion Drab, and mixing a bit of pale sand in, I went ahead and did some highlights on the rocks. You don't have to keep this too complicated, you can just dry brush it, but I wanted to experiment around with something a little bit different. Now, if you've seen any of my videos, you know exactly how I'm going to paint the base. Starting off with some red, I went ahead and base coated the entire thing. And then while this was wet, this is pretty important to give it a nice smooth transition, I grabbed our orange and then I just went around the outer rim. You might have to bring a lot more paint in to make sure that it's nice and smooth, but don't worry too much. Next up, finally, with our yellow, I just went on the very edge of the base. It gives it that nice hot magma feel and really ties it all together. If you do want to go a step further, what you can see right here is I watered down our red paint and just went slightly over the base of the rock. This creates a nice little glowing effect. And if you're not too happy with how smooth it is, I ended up just dampening my brush and washing off all the excess paint, making sure that it was nice and smooth, and just coming over and feathering that line out so it wasn't super harsh. And finally, like with all our models, we're going to paint the base rim black, and with that, the model is complete. As you can see, I'm super happy with how this turned out. Overall, this paint job took me maybe roughly about an hour and a half. Using the airbrush was a massive help, but all of these steps can be repeated with a brush. You're just going to have to be a little bit more patient and work a little bit more slowly. But for the sake of getting this video out on time, I had to use the airbrush. I hope you all enjoyed this video, and I'm super keen to do some more conversions in the future. Drop a comment down below what legions you want to see me take on next. I've got a bunch of different models in the Ultimate Starter set, and I really want to do some cool stuff with them, so make sure you leave a comment down below. And until next time, ladies and gentlemen, Happy hobbying. Bye.